Hello and welcome to another episode of the Virtual Ninja Show. My name is Andrew Mathu and I'm a product manager in the Azure Network Security Customer Experience Engineering team. Today we are going to be discussing about Azure DDoS Protection, taking a closer look at what Azure DDoS Protection is. With me, I have my colleague Salim Bseeu. Salim, please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you everyone for watching this. So my name is Salim Bseeu. I'm a senior product manager at Microsoft. I specifically work with Azure Firewall, Azure Web Application Firewall, and Azure DDoS Protection, which is our topic today, right? And I work with customers and also in product management engineering.
Let's start off. What is Azure DDoS Protection?
Yeah, sure. So maybe we can start first with what is a DDoS attack, right? So DDoS attack stands for distributed denial of service type of attack, and it's usually when a attacker or a hacker tries to bring down or degrade the applications or the network of the organization or their target, right? And there are different types of DDoS attacks. You have, for example, volumetric, which is based on a huge volume of packets or traffic sent to the target. You can have also a protocol type, which is different, where it utilizes the protocol level resources of the network, like your firewall, your application gateway, or the server you have. And then there's the layer 7, which is resource type of DDoS attacks, which is more targeted at a layer 7 type of attacks. And for example, like Slowlers, which targets the server that you have. And the Azure DDoS protection itself, which is a global network DDoS protection for cloud-based virtual networks that you have in Azure. The protection provided is against layer 3 and layer 4 type of DDoS attacks. And it has, of course, different features like adaptive tuning. It's global. You have also migration with different telemetry, metrics, and also logging.
Awesome. That's great to know. So let me ask, how does really Azure DDoS protection work? How does it work to mitigate against these DDoS attacks that you listed?
Yeah, that's a good question. So Azure DDoS protection is, so first thing to remember is that it's not an inline DDoS protection, which means that we have certain thresholds. And once the threshold is met, then what happens is that traffic is rerouted to our mitigation pipelines, where it's checked for malicious traffic. So malicious traffic there is dropped. The legitimate traffic is forwarded to your public IPs, right? And these thresholds are different for each customer and for each public IP, right? So we have the adaptive tuning, which is basically learning the traffic patterns for each customer in each public IP where you have the DDoS protection enabled, right? And then you will have 3 different policies and 3 different thresholds for different types of DDoS attacks. Once the threshold is met, then the mitigation starts. And we have different mitigation techniques depending, of course, on the threshold.
Awesome. That's great to know. So let me ask, this DDoS, Azure DDoS protection, does it have like levels or tiers? How exactly does it look like from that customer perspective?
So first we have the Azure DDoS infrastructure protection. So this is basically provided for all customers, right? And what we mean, what this does is that every shared resource we have on Azure, or for example, the data centers in Azure are protected with infrastructure DDoS level, right? While the Azure DDoS protection is more specifically for the customers and the workloads that they have, right? And we currently have 2 SKUs, Azure DDoS protection. So we have the network SKU and also the IP SKU, right? So the network SKU, at least today, is more for, let's say, like strategic customers, like bigger customers, because you can protect 100 IPs or more with it, and it comes in as a plan. While the IP protection is more for small to medium businesses. It's targeted for like customers who have 5 to 10 public IPs you want to protect with DDoS protection, and it's more cheaper, right?
Awesome. You mentioned that there's the Azure customers will have that basic infrastructure level protection. So with this, aren't they protected against DDoS attacks? Why would they want to go with either network protection or IP protection?
That's a good question. So, what's the difference, right, between them? The infrastructure DDoS protection is there to protect Azure resources, or shared resources that the customers have in Azure. And an example is like if there was like a 1 million packet volumetric DDoS attack, right, on Azure, that could bring down, for example, data centers or different endpoints that Azure has, right? So that's where the infrastructure DDoS protection comes in and protects all the customers that have that are sharing this tenant, and also our Azure resources, right? So you have like maybe your Azure front door, which is CDNs, and we have the infrastructure DDoS protection to make sure that they're always up running. Now the difference is that when you have an attacker, and let's say you have a web application running behind, like in your workload, right? And if they start let's say like 100,000 packet per second attack, right? And let's say like it's TCP sync flood attack. So for Azure, it will not see it as an attack because that amount of traffic is pretty low. Some customers have a lot, millions more than that, and it will not affect Azure. In that case, it will see it as normal traffic. However, for the customer themselves, that amount of traffic is a DDoS attack, and it can bring down the web server, right? So what the Azure DDoS protection does basically is that it adapts to the traffic pattern for that specific customer and that IP, and it puts the thresholds at the levels where it will protect the customer from being brought down by volumetric attack or protocol layer attack, right? In that case.
Great. So now we know why they need it. Just to follow up, what kind of resources within Azure can you protect with Azure DDoS protection? Can you give us an overview?
Sure thing. The Azure DDoS protection is for VNet-based IPs, and basically what we mean by this is resources that are deployed in your VNet, and you can attach public IPs to them, right? An example is you have like an application gateway, you can attach public IPs to it, an Azure firewall, VM scale set, and different resources, right? So all of these resources, your public IPs, are open to attacks from the because it's public facing. So that's where you can enable DDoS protection, and what happens is that all the IPs on these resources you have then have the DDoS protection on layer 3 and 4.
So Salim, yeah, that was great. That's some very good information. So now how can one configure Azure DDoS protection? What are the steps involved? Are you able to show us that in a demo?
Yes, absolutely. So I'm going to start first with our first queue, which is the network protection. So first thing I'm going to run here, I'm going to go for DDoS, and I'm going to click on DDoS protection plans, right? So you can see here the resources. So the scope of DDoS protection plan is at tenant level. It means that you can protect all the subscriptions you have under that specific tenant. And that's important to know when creating this plan. To create a plan, you can just click on create here, and you'll choose a subscription, resource group you want, name, and also the region, and then deploy it. In our case here, we already have one, so I'm just gonna open it. So after you finish creating the plan, now the only thing you do is basically add the VNets here and the public IPs you want to protect, right? So if I go under the protected resources, it will show you here all the VNets and the public IPs they have that we are protecting right now. To add another VNet and all the public IPs that it has deployed there, you can click on add and select here the subscription, resource group, and the VNet that you want to use. Now, once you add the VNet here, basically all the public IPs in that VNet have DDoS protection enabled. And you can see here some of the different resources here we have. And you can see that this is, for example, the public IP for a firewall we have. This is an application gateway and so on. And you can see different resources here. This is how you create it on the DDoS network SKU. If you want to use the IP SKU, basically what you have to do is go for the specific public IP. And in this case, let me go back to home, and I'm going to select the public IP we have over here. So you go to the public IP resource itself, and then on the right down corner here, you'll see protect IP address. So you click on this, And this is also super useful if you want to understand and to see if this public IP has DDoS protection enabled, right? So you can see here the protection status, which tells us that it's protected because we have it in the network plan. But if we want to use the IP SKU, then you just click on this IP SKU and save it. And that's how you enable and how you set up also the DDoS protection. It's pretty straightforward, simple, and that's because we have the adaptive tuning and it does the setting of the thresholds by itself.
Yeah, this is great. Looks pretty easy to set up. So Salim, let me ask, when customers set up either the Azure network DDoS protection or the IP protection, are they able to monitor and investigate, for example, if they had a DDoS attack?
Absolutely. And let me show you how to do it. So we are actually in the right place right now. This is the public IP resource, right? So the metrics that I will show you are always going to be in the public IP resource itself. It's not in the DDoS plan. So under the public IP resource, you go down onto the monitoring, and then you will find the metrics over here. So I'm going to click on it. And the first one I want to show you, and this is Andrew, the one you mentioned about how to see, like, if you're under DDoS attack or the history of it, right? So you open the metric here and go down to the bottom. You will see one called under DDoS attack or not. So I'm just going to click on this, and you will see that it's on 0. 0 means that there is no DDoS attack or there was no DDoS mitigation. And 1 means that there was, right? So this is for the last 24 hours. What I'm going to do, I'm going to go to the last 30 days and apply it, right? Now you will see here that we have a few ones here, and this means that at this time, for example, November 27th at 3 p.m., there was a DDoS mitigation, so the threshold was met. And this is how you can monitor it when there was a DDoS attack. And one extra thing that is very useful that you can do based on this metric is that you can just create a new rule alert. And basically when there is a DDoS mitigation, so when it goes to 1, it will send you, like, for example, an email or an SMS, depending on really what you want to configure. So you can configure the new alert rule over here. The other thing that you can see in the metrics is the thresholds, right? And I'm going to show you one example of, for example, the inbound TCP metric packets to trigger DDoS mitigation. So I'm just going to click on it. And you can see here, this is the threshold, which is 300,000 packets per second. And you can see it changed just once. This will change, of course, based on the traffic that the customer has, or based on the scaling out of the attached resource, right? And this one will be different for each customer and for each public IP based on the adaptive tuning that we have over there. And yeah, this is how you see the metrics. One more thing, which is also very important. This, as you can see, like the information you get here, it gives you some good overview, but it's pretty limited. For more in-depth investigation, the best thing is to go to the diagnostic settings you have for the public IP. And what you do, you create a diagnostic setting and you send the logs, which we have here, like 3 categories. For example, log space analytics, or you can send it to different sources that you have destinations. And these different categories have different levels of information that can be used for reporting or for also investigating, like previous DDoS mitigations and also attacks.
Awesome. This looks great. Very comprehensive. So you have the logging and you have the metrics. Now, this will allow customers to know if they were under a DDoS attack. Let me ask, are there any reports? Is it possible to visualize and get reports that can also be shared with other security teams in the organization?
So we do actually have a workbook that you can use as a report, and it's available in Microsoft documentation. You can deploy it directly from there. And let me show you how this workbook looks like and how you can utilize it. So I'm going to go back to services here. I'm going to look for our Azure workbooks. And we have the first one here is for the Azure DDoS Protection. I'm going to open it and open the workbook, right? So this is the workbook, or you can use it as a DDoS report. The first thing I'm going to have to select is the workspace. So I'm going to select the workspace here as CyberSOC. Now, if you remember, the CyberSOC is the workspace analytics where we are sending the logs that I showed you just earlier. So this workbook will be based on those logs, but it will aggregate all of that information into one report that's easier to filter through to understand the information, right? And as you can see here, you can select, of course, the time range and the specific public IPs, right, that you want to see where the information from. And what you can see here is, for example, the traffic overview gives you information about like the total packets, how many packets were dropped, TCP, UDP packets. If I go down over here, it shows you different mitigations that happened, and you can click on one of these if you want to drill down and investigate a specific DDoS attack. You can see the resources that were, for example, affected. Down here, you have information about, for example, like the protocols. You can see the continent of origin. You can see the countries where the attacks were coming from, AS numbers, and of course, also the drop reason, like why it was dropped. And same thing here, you have information on that. And then down here, we have a lot more like raw mitigation logs, which gives you all the information about like the packets that were forwarded or that were dropped and what was the reason, right? And going back up, you will see that we have also different tabs. So you can also look at all the metrics and also do investigation to specific attack, for example, right? So this workbook is pretty useful to give you like an aggregated overview, and it's easier to use than going like IP by IP and checking all the logs. Instead, you have all of them here, and this can be also shared like with the leadership for reporting on DDoS attacks.
This is great. So let me ask, for a customer who has Azure DDoS Protection, are they able to test to see how effective it is? How will they be able to know before an actual DDoS attack occurs that they are actually protected? How do you go about that?
So yes, actually there's a few ways to do it, and it's always recommended to do a simulation testing on your workloads, on the your landing zones, to make sure that your architecture and the resiliency of the network that you have can withstand a DDoS attack. And specifically like layer 3 and 4 volumetric and protocol DDoS types of attacks. And there is a few ways to do it. On Azure Microsoft, we recommend you to use our simulation partners. We have 4 of them, and let me show you who they are. These 4 simulation partners, you can use them to initiate different types of DDoS attacks. So these are available here in our documentation. You can also have a look. We have Breaking Point, Macebolt, Red Button, and Red Wolf. And they have different types of DDoS simulation attacks like layer 7, volumetric, protocol, and different types of attacks, and also the size of it, right? So this is the best way, of course, to test your environment against DDoS attacks and make sure that there are no gaps in the security.
Oh, wow, that's great. That's great to have these simulation partners. Yeah, this is a good strategy to always proactively test. This is great to know. So finally, Salim, let me ask, what are some common challenges that maybe businesses face when managing Azure DDoS protection, and how can they overcome them?
A common challenge that I've seen working with a lot of customers, and the one that comes up a few times, and usually in strategic, like big customers, but not just big customers, but also smaller customers, is the ability to scale, right? And the scalability part of, let's say, the configuration of Azure DDoS protection. And what I mean by this is an example of most networks infrastructure that we have, they always change, either increasing, decreasing, and changing into different shapes. Now, when organizations add new VNets, they add new applications to these VNets, you have new firewalls, application gateways, and all sorts of services, then they also attach the public IPs to them. It's a bit difficult to make sure that the DDoS protection is enabled on these newly added VNets and also public IPs. So what's the best way to do it, right? Like how can you do it automatically and safely? You can enforce a policy, right? So best way to do it is to use an Azure policy. And let me show you one Azure policy, which is quite useful. So I'm going to write here policy. I'm going to click to the Azure policy resources, and I'm going to go to definitions here. And basically what I'm going to show you is how to, and these are built in, basically, Azure policies. So they're available for all customers if you go and search here for DDoS. So the one I want to show you is very useful for something that scales. And I'm going to open the virtual network should be protected by Azure DDoS protection, right? So this definition, once you have it enabled, you can make sure that all the new public IPs that are added to that VNet have DDoS protection enabled on them, right? And you can also, of course, select only like by a specific tag on the VNet. So for example, like VNets with tag production, you can have this definition scoped just for that. and exclude like VNets that are like for testing, and for example VNets that you don't have public IPs, right? So yeah, so this is a really useful way for customers to make sure that they are scalable, that this is enforced. Of course, a lot of customers have regulations, policies, so this is a good way to make sure that you have DDoS protection enabled even for new public IPs added, right? And this can be also, of course, used for enabling logging. So as I showed you earlier, logging, you have to enable it per public IP. You can have it just a Azure policy, and then make sure that all of your public IPs have logging enabled, and these logs are sent to your destination resource where you're viewing the logs.
Awesome. This is great. Very helpful, very great tip for our customers, and especially when it comes to managing, large scale public IP addresses and protecting them with Azure DDoS protection. So with that, finally, we've come to the end of our Virtual Ninja show. Thank you very much, Salim, for being a great guest in today's show. And I'm looking forward to seeing you in the future again. Thank you and bye bye.